Well, welcome to a talk about the book in the campus history series of Arcadia Publications, University of California, Davis. It'll be by myself, Dennis Dingemans, and the co-author, you've got both here, Ann Scheuring. And we'll be talking, each of us, for 2 segments apiece. I'll begin by talking about 4 slides, and then Ann will talk about 3 chapters, and then we'll finish up with my segment and Ann's. This is our 3rd book on the third stop on the book tour. First, a little context. This is an Arcadia Publications book. There are over 8,000 books in the same format, about 230 pictures in each of them. The aim is the pictures to be 50 years old or more in general. And there are local examples shown here on this slide, and UC Davis is the most recent of the local versions of Arcadia Publications. Here is the godmother of them all, Abundant Harvest, which Ann wrote about 12 years ago. A fantastic book, and now at a fantastic price. We're hoping people will rush to their bookstore and get them when they're newly inexpensive. An extremely useful book. And we like to highlight the most useful single section of the book, page 300 to 301, a very wonderful detailed highlights of or milestones of UC Davis history. Thank you, Ann, for providing this reference and for thinking of doing it and executing it so wonderfully. A few notes about the sources. The 142 images that come from special collections, that was low-hanging fruit. The special collections staff has put about 4,000 images related to the history in a single collection. It is really a photo researcher's dream. But we had to complicate it, and we went out and got photographs from 18 other sources just to prove we could do it. And here we are with the first image, and this will be Ann's.
Okay, do I need to talk into this or not? I don't think so.
Probably not.
Okay, this is the...
You have to push the button, so...
Oh, well, I don't think I need it. This is the cover photo, as you know. I think you've all seen the book. And we chose it because it's a kind of an iconic photo. It shows students in the Depression years, the 1930s, just after Prohibition ended. And there was a renaissance of the Department of Viticulture and Enology, winemaking on campus. And here is a classroom of would-be winemakers, presumably, evaluating grape varieties. And we thought it was a very good picture to start the book out with because UC Davis is world famous for its viticulture and enology. Let's see, what do I do? I keep
Push lower right-hand side.
What?
Lower right-hand side and push forward.
Lower right-hand side.
Here we go.
It says end. Okay. I'm going to do the first 3 chapters that are chronological, and we'll go through them pretty rapidly. As you probably all know, the College of Agriculture was a very well-respected part of UC Berkeley. But by the 1890s, they decided that they could not really do research or give instruction that in Berkeley, which is kind of a different climate from the Great Central Valley where most of the agriculture takes place. So they wanted to get a university farm, and it took a few years to do that, but in 1905 there was an act of the legislature which created funding for a state university farm. And there was quite a series of trips throughout the state looking for appropriate sites. This was the site that was finally chosen in 1906, and it is the former Jerome Davis farm. This map comes from about 1858, I think, out of a California Agricultural Society bulletin, and it shows Poudre Creek, the bank, and then some of the orchards and the corrals and so on. So This was the original site of the university farm. Here, when the building started being built in 1907, some of the first buildings to go up were the creamery to the far right, the water tower, of course, to supply water for the campus. I believe that's South Hall, or North Hall. I don't think South Hall is in that picture. And then East Hall, just the gables showing behind this outbuilding there. So those are some of the first buildings on campus built in 1907. Here are the two dorms that were built by 1912, North and South Hall, and the quad, as we know it today, was used in the early years, not only for crops, because that was also a source of income, and the animals needed grain, and the students could watch the crops being properly grown on the quad. Here is the Wyatt Livestock Judging Pavilion, very well-known photo. I think they are washing a sheep fleece here. Wyatt Pavilion, of course, has been turned into a theater. That's another story of its own. Here's livestock was an extremely important part of the campus, and students learned how to judge livestock in teams and went to various national conventions and conferences and shows, and even showed university livestock. But they did very well in the competitions up through the 1920s. This is Thomas Tavernetti, a very popular staff person. He started out as a student and then was taken onto the staff, and that's a Milo field. He died, unfortunately, young, but I think the Tavernetti Bell was named for him. Here's a hemp photo. Hemp, of course, the cousin of marijuana, is an extremely useful crop in lots of ways. It's a fiber crop, and for several years, the university tried hemp as one of their experimental crops. Sports got started early, and here's a handsome basketball team, pre-war, or well, I guess this is 1917, is it? Anyway, that's Babe Slater, the second from the right in the back row, and he later got Olympic awards and was a very well-known alumnus. Some of the early yearbooks had very talented artists, and we picked this one because it's kind of a funny cartoon showing a faculty member is going to relieve a bloat in a cow, which was a serious medical problem, although it's made comic here. But that is, a talented cartoonist. Chapter 2, it became the College of Agriculture at Davis after, rather than the university farm after the war. Well, in the mid-1920s. And here was one of the buildings that was built after World War I. It didn't last very long, unfortunately. It had some structural defects and had to be torn down by 1940 and was replaced by what is now the library. Here is the soils lab. It looks pretty primitive, but that's how they were judging the soils in the 1930s. And soils research, of course, is extremely important in California because there are so many different kinds of soils in the state and suitable for different crops. Here's a staged dairy lab picture from the 1930s. Dairy industry was one of the most popular courses on campus during the 1930s because dairy people could always find a job. And, that kept more than half of the students, I think, in a couple of years were dairy industry students on the campus in the 1930s. Here's a wide open spaces picture. You see the quad in the front with the cars parked along the way, and that is now Hart Hall. It was the Animal Science Building for a long time. That's Horticulture Hall to the right of it. Hart Hall is still used, but the classroom building is long gone. And this one has got three stalwarts of food science and viticulture in it. Maynard Amarine is a young man in this picture up in the upper right-hand corner. The great William Cruz is pouring his glass, and down below, Albert Winkler, who was a viticulturalist, is taking notes. The other three are not identified, but that was a state wine judging panel, I think just before World War II. Here is a drama group from the 1930s, and in the middle, the pretty little woman in the middle, sitting in the middle of the front row is Celeste Turner Wright, as she became. And she was the first woman PhD on campus and had a very long and treasured career on the campus. But she did everything in the early days, including editing the Ag Experiment Station bulletins when she wasn't teaching English or coaching drama. This is troops deployed before World War II, or at the beginning of World War II. The Army Signal Corps took over the campus. Here they're drilling right before the new swimming pool and gym, which was a WPA project during the Depression. And here is a wonderful aerial that shows the campus, what does it say, 1924? No, that's College Park. This was a 1940 aerial. The horseshoe up in the upper left-hand corner is College Park. For a long time, a lot of faculty people lived in Berkeley and came up to Davis on the train, but there was a real need for faculty housing. So College Park was organized in 1924 just out of Fields. A very prestigious address now, of course, but that's what it looked like in 1940. And this is a really interesting aerial to study if you're looking for how the campus grew up until 1940. This is after the war. The Aggie Villa barracks were originally Army barracks that were brought up as surplus housing to the campus when the students started flooding back after World War II. And lots of veterans lived there. The big thing in 1950 was the opening of the building for the new School of Veterinary Medicine, still on the campus and very well known. But it was a real lift for the campus when this first professional school opened. Entomology has a long history at Davis. We're not sure who this beekeeper is. I don't think it's Harry Laidlaw, but anyway, that's always been a very important part of the College of Agriculture because bees are so important in pollinating so many crops. There was a lot of research in the late 1950s and the early 1960s on mechanization of harvesting of various crops. Probably the best known example is the tomato harvester, which made a lot of news headlines, but this happens to be a prototypical grape harvester. Lots of work in ag engineering on mechanical harvesting. Home economics was very popular during the 1950s. I guess they had a pretty good budget because they could afford to have chunks of meat that most of us would only see maybe once every 5 years or something. But anyway, they learned how to cook it. Here's the Cal Aggie Flying Farmers. The University Airport came with the property, the Straylock Farm, across what is now 113. And at the time, it was one of the first university airports. But my husband corrected me on this and said that University of Illinois had an airport too, so I'm not sure about that. But anyway, that was a flying club, and probably a lot of these people in there were actual veterans from World War II who had learned to fly. One girl, I don't know if she was a stewardess or a pilot. At the time. All right. Here's picnic day, the marriage of, we have lots of picnic day floats that Dennis is going to show you, but we picked this one because in 1950 was one or two, I can't remember, it celebrates the opening of the College of Letters and Science and joining the College of Agriculture. So by this time, Davis was well on its way to becoming a full university. And that's where I'm going to turn it over to Dennis.
Good work, Ann. the frantic pace of construction was not unique to Davis. With the demographic profile of California in the 1960s, we built campuses and campus buildings at a very rapid rate all over California. And most remarkable is in the lower left, the 9-story tall Sproul Hall, erected within weeks as the West's tallest precast concrete structure. The building I spent lots of years in, Kerr Hall, is not built yet, but it's in the upper right when it will be built. So we were densifying around the quad and migrating to the west into the science building areas. Emil Mrak, who happened to be present at the time, and it probably would have been growing in quantity and quality even if he hadn't been such an effective leader. But he enjoyed a very positive reputation, we understand, when he was the leader, and his reputation has not been diminished afterwards. So he finished strong. One of his characteristics that was part of rumor, and there's some truth to it as well, was his friendliness with the students. And here he is shown with Bob Black, who was probably an equally charismatic and equally activist person, who was head of student government, although he hadn't in 1967 been there very long, playing horseshoes. Here's Mrak with the leadership team of the medical school, and there are some apocryphal stories about how Mrak was offered a medical school and had the wisdom not to reject it as being too troublesome, and chose very effective leaders, especially Tupper. And as the slide at the bottom says, the decision to basically move it to the medical center campus in Sacramento was a bold and controversial move at the time that turned out to be wildly successful if you judge by the size and diversity of the campus over in Sacramento. It happened fast and it happened well. Here is the campus leadership paying attention to history, and put it in because as a member of the Historical Society, we're delighted that both Meyer and Mrak and Maynard Skinner, the charismatic leadership, are willing to participate in an historical society event, planting a plaque. And here's yet another Emil Mrak, quite an impressive looking picnic day, parade event. And it's a miraculous decade. I love puns, and it indicates in 1969 that Mrak went out at the top of his game. One of the characteristics of the 60s was big science was accommodated in the campus. We weren't such a great power in nuclear physics. We did medium quality energy experiments, but here's a dedication of a cyclotron. And I believe this is the one that was not a cast-off, hand-me-down from Berkeley, but we won this one fair and square on our own. Big science at the time included viticulture and enology, and when I first saw this slide, I never thought we would put it in the book, but it had such a nice story to it. This was a huge grant that it was obtained in the 60s and ran into the 70s to do studies of fermentation part of viticulture. And we hired a staff to administrate the machinery, and Harry Brenner, who is not photographed here, was an aircraft mechanic who was retired and lives in Davis and is happy to talk about his career and what a wonderfully ironic situation it was that he never drank wine and he didn't know a thing about viticulture, but after 20 years of running the experimental machinery, he became the campus winemaker. And he did learn a little bit about wine, but he doesn't drink it, and he's a machinery man, but he's the campus winemaker. Big science is epitomized by the Primate Research Center. We had the space and the inclination, we had the veterinary connection, and this has been a cash cow, so to speak, for the University of California at Davis. It's also been the source of some problematic issues. The the chief salesman for Arcadia Publications, when he was here on campus in January trying to line up a placement, said he lost one placement because we had a picture of the Primate Center, and the business, which will remain nameless, wouldn't carry any book that gave positive press to the Primate Center. So PETA is alive and well in the area and costing us book sales. One of the things that is objectively true as well as popularly rumored was the Davis campus was famously friendly with an especially great number of popular and effective teachers. And Milton Hildebrand, a zoology professor, epitomizes this, both for his scientific work and for his willingness to teach a class in human sexuality that students took in great numbers, and it was a rigorous class. He gave lots of attention to the challenge of teaching. Also effective in the panoply of professors who are popular and devoted and care a lot about their campus and have a very positive attitude towards things. Kern Holloman here, shown in his conducting class. Oops. Well, we were a campus that was well positioned during the time of Western movies and television. Here is a 1935 photo by Ansel Adams of what we think is a student riding a fantastically good-looking horse and rolling a cigarette. And this is one of the aspects of the campus. Here you can ride a horse at a time when the coolest thing in the world was to be horseback.
Dennis?
Yes?
Do you know how it came about that Ansel Adams came to campus and did the photos?
He happened to be selected, Ansel Adams did, to be the campus photographer, and he did a number of contract items. And John Scarstead here showed me the 1935 pamphlet with all the photographs by Ansel Adams, and it advertised, it's a bulletin of the university administration saying that this is the farm that became a campus, and they just happened to have chosen somebody who had real talent in the photography. Now, John, what else? What do I need else to say about how Adams came connected?
He didn't move here.
No, he wasn't
He
campus.
didn't move here. He just visited.
Yeah.
He stayed in San Francisco.
Yeah. And certainly his most famous work, Fiat Lux, deals with all of the campuses basically equally. And yes, he doesn't want to come out here just because he can ride a horse. If he wants to ride a horse, he can ride up and down Yosemite's mountains on horseback.
So basically this was contract work?
Yeah, it was contract.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
I'm
Interesting.
sorry, I missed the question.
Okay.
And as we saw earlier, this is 1941, and the AGR, the main agricultural fraternity, is being photoed as the dudes hanging around their bunkhouse. And this is 16 years earlier, and this is the subject of some interpretation. I've looked at every page of every one of the student yearbooks. I've never seen a photograph of co-eds wearing coveralls, except this one, which is explicitly Labor Day. So it's not the campus where the girls wear the equipment to go out to milk the cows. This is a very rare example, and that is getting ready to go working on the Student Volunteer Day. This is some of the male recreation which got out of control and had to be suppressed because it was a little too violent for the image of the campus. And this is a muddy tug of war between first-year students and upperclassmen, and it was part of the frost-off brawl tradition, which got reconstructed in the 50s, but in a friendlier way. Here's a reconstruction, 1959. This is tug of war. Yes, they're pulling each other into a muddy pit, but in this case, it's the girls, and they have a pretty happy attitude to it. this is the subject of some controversy, but the captions in the scrapbook where we found this said that they're digging during Labor Day in 1936 the pit which became the swimming pool next to Hickey Gym a couple of years later. It was called the plunge, the university plunge, at a time when that was what they called swimming pools. And this was part of a Labor Day project in 1936 when they also were digging the Arboretum, the foundations for the redwood grove. Picnic, the Labor Day was a big tradition, and this is in 1964, the last sanctioned Labor Day, when student volunteers actually did real work, and the insurance liability of the campus didn't shut it down. And in this case, they're taking down a two-story building. And I guess from the student point of view, what fun! You're doing something real, and you're doing it in a coordinated way with your friends. This is West Hall. Students posed in a tradition from the very earliest of the student yearbooks. Faculty or students have posed in front of these buildings on the quad, and here's an especially attractive looking one, lots of students in 1916. And it's a tradition that gets resurrected in 1971 for the student yearbook. They're sitting in the front of Gilmore Hall. And it certainly must have been in the knowledge that they were doing what had been done decades earlier, having a group photo. A spring tradition that's been, alas, lost, the spring sing. For those who like choral music, this must have been quite a treat. There are 80 voices here in this particular choir, and it is a wonderful Americana tradition that unfortunately is not continued. The students at Davis were especially active in Labor Day and from the very beginning, and students at Davis were especially active in environmental projects in the 60s and 70s. Yes, there were protests, as seen here, where a train was stopped at the depot. They began on a midweek day with a rally on campus, then cast about for what else to do, and they tried to stop the traffic on the freeway and settled for stopping a train. So we had an activist anti-war group. We had a positive student organization, Bob Black campaign, and a campaign for student body president of bringing in public transit, and a couple of geography majors who knew were going to London anyway, conceived of the idea and executed it. They bought a couple of London buses and shipped them, reconverted them so they could be used in streets, got permission. By golly, what a brilliant idea to get London buses to popularize a new bus service. And it's the Davis can-do attitude, and students empowered by a very cooperative administration in general with regard to student projects. The KDVS, again, student initiated with a cooperative administration that basically said, go for it, and provided space in Freeborn Hall in the basement. There have been a series of recreation halls, and several of them, there's been a great deal of effort going into getting the funding for it. The yearbooks say that this first rec hall from 1921 was a result of a great deal of lobbying for the money to do it. That the students and the administration very much wanted a recreation building, and eventually the money was appropriated. And the first event, before the building was even done, was boxing, one of the most successful and popular sports at UC Davis when it was an agricultural campus. And in this case, quite an impressive group of people dressed the way they would dress if they were at Madison Square Garden. And this is boxing at the UC Davis Rec Hall, involving some students and people from the campus and the wider community. At the time, there were two boxers, the Fighting Lopez brothers, They were really very good. One of them became a professional in fighting in New York and New Jersey. So we had talent out here on the farm. And one of the Lopez brothers worked for Charlie Rao up in Cape Hay and his family. So there's a local connection who tells me about the Fighting Lopez brothers. In 1926, a big-time football game. It's the Navy game, but the Navy team is not from Annapolis. UC Davis beat the team from Vallejo, and the Mare Island Navy team. We got a successful band that had very early on quite a bit of style and talent, and this is Price Gettinger, who was a faculty member who was hired to make music work at Davis, and by all counts was very successful. There's lots of talent on campus. To the right-hand side is Mary Jean Gilhooly, a woman who gave herself private and training at her own expense so she could be a great drum majorette. Bought her own uniform, was very stylish, and so we had a band that was just as good as the Berkeley band, according to the Cal Aggie, epitomized in the leadership of Gettinger and Gilhooly. We, for a couple of years, had a judo team because the guy in the upper right-hand corner, a staff member with some training in judo, assembled a judo team that the Aggie, the yearbooks report, won a lot of matches in judo. They had talent, and in this case, as has been pointed out by several of my friends who have looked at it, this is really a very international campus. And shown here are people from East Asia and from the Middle East. We're a campus that is perhaps more famous for its intramural than its varsity sports in terms of the success. And here is a Muddy Spring football team. This is an illustration of powder puff football, and we put it in because it parallels the women's intramurals with the men's intramurals, and it has the terrifically funny label of this team as being the G string. Not the A string, not the B string, but the G string, and it's female. This is from 1950 when Westerns made archery a popular sport. This is clearly a staged photo because it's 7 guys and 7 girls, and they are really dressed very well. And look at the way they have been successful in putting arrows in the middle of the target. These are the UC Davis students. When they do bow and arrow, they really hit the center of the target. Here is a major figure in coaching, and Maria Welch. And one of the things the caption points out was she was multi-talented. Within a couple of years, she had done a whole lot of things. We get a female faculty, the first one full-time in athletics, and we overwork her. And apparently, she's not a complaining type. She spent a long career here, and in this case, looking really good and having talent to coach archery, basketball, riflery, softball, swimming, tennis, track and field, and volleyball, all within the first few years she was here. And then the greatest moment in sports, and there have been several things that could have been cited: the football victory over Stanford, the great comeback victory over UOP. The one we chose, and the athletic people were delighted to supply it, is a very wonderful photograph of a great event, winning the Division II National Basketball Championship, just as Turkey hosts Dante Ross in 1998. Oh, I get another chapter. I'm sorry. That was going to be my wind-up. My favorite aspect of this early photograph of the cars lined up for picnic day is that in the upper right-hand corner is a grove of eucalyptus trees that was planted around this sewer system to mask the odor of the sewer system and to evaporate the water from the sewer system. And for 25 years, I parked my bicycle against a eucalyptus tree that was part of that grove. Today, most of them have been removed, but there they are in the northwest part of the quad. Margaret Kelly here is an allegorical classical figure at the plow in a picnic day float from the agronomy department. And we put this in part because it turned out she was a talent academically as well as a beauty. And 20 years later, she was the author with Robbins of the faculty of a multi-edition, multi-volume book, Weeds of California. And a lot of effort went into this agronomy float. Even more effort went into this one, which I like it because it has a globe and a geo perspective. It says on the bottom of the float, California's farm market is the world, and it shows connections between a map of California in the back of the float and places in the world where products go to and from California. This is a very elaborate float from when people really took Picnic Day Parade seriously. Here's probably what is following the end of World War I, the Arc de Triomphe, but placing agronomy as being the head of agricultural progress, supported by all the minor disciplines like history and chemistry and botany and biochemistry, but all supporting, but the keystone is agronomy at the top of the arch. The floats sometimes here were really quite elaborate in the 50s. This is a float by the pomology department. This could be in the Rose Parade in terms of the structure of the float. It's not just some farm wagon that they plugged a message on it. This is really quite an elaborate device. And Fruits of Research is basically, it looks like a beaker of some kind, producing the chemicals which are chasing away the ants in the front of the float. They're running away from the chemicals, and the fruit on the front of the float looks really glorious. Better Living Through Chemistry, brought to you by the pomology department. And the final section here, a campus hallmark, is the wonderful use that's been made of Pewter Creek. And this is a mid-20s photograph of temporary buildings that still exist today. What is more permanent than a temporary building on a college campus? And this is the shores of Pewter Creek, and there's a Percheron horse in the middle preparing a garden. Here we think, from a wonderful scrapbook image, which we think hasn't been published before, it's clearly the 1936 Labor Day, and we think they're doing the first work on the T. Elliott Weir Redwood Grove, and we can pin down the location because of the hog barn behind it, and it's not clear whether they're doing either or both, cutting out the old trees or putting in the redwood trees. But it's the date when you go to the Redwood Grove, it says it began in 1936. Well, we found the 1936 picture, which the Arboretum said they were looking for. Camp Puda, and this is an example of use of the Pewter Creek as a recreational resource. This is just south of we believe, south of the airport. And then we finally go to the last chapter for Ann to wrap it up.
Yeah, we wanted the last chapter to be something about UC Davis and the wider world, because obviously UC Davis is world renowned, and it's had international connections actually ever since it opened as the University of Farm, because in one of the very earliest yearbooks, there is a picture of a student from Mesopotamia. All right, so you know there were foreign students at the University Farm from the very beginning, and there are lots of them now, of course. But this focuses this chapter more on research contributions and that type of thing. I was a little frustrated in putting this together because there were so many subjects that could have been covered, and you can only get the pictures that are available. I searched very hard there was some that we couldn't find, but anyway, this is a pretty good collection of ag research photos, I think. A demonstration train photo has been used a lot in 1928. For a long time, for a number of years, the College of Agriculture at Berkeley and Davis sent out demonstration trains to various rural communities in the Central Valley to show some of what the campuses were doing. And here is, some of the staff, including students who went out on these trains to talk in individual communities. Here's an example of, having taken some of the university's prize stock off the off the train, and talking about the fine points of the livestock to the people who have come in from farms and rural communities to see it. So these were quite effective. They went on for several years during the 1920s when there was a lot of subdivision of property and ranches, and people trying to make a go of it on small farms and needed a lot of information. Here is one of the big researchers in poultry research, Vigfús Asmundsson, showing the fine points of poultry to some apparently South American visitors, Latin American visitors. Here is Max Kleiber, and he did a tremendous amount of research on animal metabolism. And here is, which became very important in the dairy industry and animal feeding and so on. And here's one of his machines that he put together. Here is Catherine Esau. She started with the campus in the 1930s. A brilliant woman. She had a long career on campus until the 1960s. And she was a pioneer in electron microscopy. But she moved to Santa Barbara in the 1960s. Maybe they gave her a better deal. And this picture might have come from there, but she was a very elegant, brilliant lady who contributed a great deal to the understanding of plant anatomy. Here's a picture of a club, actually, a student club. The World Agricultural Society, that's probably a lot of the international students on campus during the time. It would have been in the 1920s. The early yearbooks showed these usually every year, pictures of these clubs. Here's John Tucker, the originator of the Tucker Oak Grove. And here he is on a research trip as a young faculty member, collecting acorns that he actually sprouted and planted. And, it's a wonderful walk over there in that oak grove today. It's a wonderful place to take a walk, where the trees are all identified, and many of them were collected and planted by John Tucker. Here is Harold Almo, who traveled all over the world, including in the wilds of Afghanistan, looking for new grape varieties that he could use in a breeding program. I tried to get a picture of him as a young man, rather than, obviously retirement age, but it was very hard to find. Another person I really wanted to get a picture of was Cal Schwabe in the School of Veterinary Medicine, because he was very well known for his international work. But I couldn't get a picture of him either. I tried several places. Here is, however, Richard Bohart, who, of course, was the founder of the Bohart Museum of Entomology, which is a fascinating place to go. We went over there to try to get pictures, and there were quite a number of them. This one was sort of the most appealing picture in a way, pictorially, but I remember one of the people over there kind of poo-pooed it. He said, butterflies. They were a lot more interested over there in beetles. They probably would have liked to have had a beetle picture rather than a butterfly picture. But anyway, that's a beautiful picture of Richard Bohart. And this is the last picture in the book. which I think is very appropriate. This is Charles Rick collecting wild tomato plants up in Chile, and two little boys apparently led him to a site, and he's taking the picture with the two little boys who led him to the site. He has holding the plant in his hand, and you know, the effect is that he's toasting the future, I think, and I just think it's a great photo. So we ended the book that way. I was going to make just a couple comments about the difference between doing a pictorial history like this and a narrative history like Abundant Harvest. I was a little frustrated with Abundant Harvest. It has a lot of pictures in it, but there were so many more that could have been included, but you know, you only have so many pictures you can, or pages in a book. And so I had always hoped there would be a follow-up book, Pictorial History of UC Davis. This is a kind of a formulaic one. It's a small one, very accessible, but it's, you know, pictorial histories have to be, they don't have the sustained narrative of written history. They're impressionistic because it depends on the pictures you could find, the quality of the pictures, who took them for what purpose, and so on. And so there are necessarily gaps that might not exist in a narrative history if you were able to really do it. But the thing about a pictorial history, of course, is that it makes people, especially, immediately accessible to you. It may be impressionistic, but you really get a sort of a sense of the times, and they really are important, I think. So with that, I'm going to close it, and I don't know if you have any questions for Dennis or for me.